The wine glass trembled in my hand, its crimson contents catching the chandelier's light like a warning. You invited him? Sarah's voice was a blade, slicing through the quiet of our dining room. Her eyes, usually soft as dawn, were sharp with something I couldn't name. Fear, anger, or something worse. I set the glass down, my pulse thudding in my ears, and forced a smile. I thought it'd be nice, to get to know your boss. Her lips parted, but no words came. The silence felt like a held breath, and I didn't know why. The idea had seemed harmless enough that morning. Sarah had been distant for weeks, her laughter rare, her gaze always drifting past me. I chalked it up to stress. Her new role at the firm demanded long hours, late nights. When she mentioned her boss, Daniel, in passing, his name lingered in my mind like a half-remembered dream. He's intense, she'd said once, her voice oddly clipped. I didn't think much of it then. But as the days passed, I noticed how her phone buzzed at odd hours, how she'd tilt the screen away from me, her fingers quick to lock it. I told myself it was work. I told myself I was being paranoid. So I invited Daniel to dinner, a gesture to bridge the gap, to understand the world that was pulling her away. I spent the day preparing, roasting lamb, slicing rosemary, setting the table with the good plates we'd only used for our anniversary. The house smelled of warmth, of effort. I wanted her to see me trying. Now, standing in our dining room, her reaction made my skin prickle. You shouldn't have done that, Mark, she said, her voice low, almost a hiss. She turned away, her hands gripping the back of a chair, knuckles pale. Why not? I asked, my tone lighter than I felt. He's your boss. I thought it'd be good for you, networking. She didn't answer, just stared at the table, her jaw tight. The air felt thick, like the moment before a storm breaks. The doorbell chimed, and Sarah flinched. I'll get it, I said, my voice steady despite the knot in my chest. Daniel stood on our porch, his tailored suit crisp, his smile polished. Mark, right? He said, extending a hand. His grip was firm, his eyes scanning me like I was a page he'd already read. Thanks for having me. I nodded, ushering him inside. But something in his ease felt too familiar, like he'd crossed our threshold before. Dinner began with forced pleasantries. The clink of forks against plates echoed in the tense quiet. Sarah barely touched her food, her eyes darting between Daniel and me. I tried to keep the conversation light. Work, the firm, her recent promotion. Sarah's been killing it, Daniel said, his voice smooth as whiskey. He leaned back, swirling his wine. She's indispensable. His gaze lingered on her, and she looked down, her cheeks flushing. I felt a pang, sharp and cold, but I brushed it off. Pride, I told myself. She's just proud. As the evening wore on, the cracks began to show. Daniel mentioned a late-night meeting last week, one Sarah hadn't told me about. You were brilliant, he said, his tone warm, intimate. Sarah's fork froze midair, her eyes wide for a fraction of a second before she recovered. Just doing my job, she mumbled. I smiled, but my mind snagged on the detail. Last week, she'd said she was at a client dinner. I sipped my wine, the bitterness sharp on my tongue. The conversation shifted, but the air grew heavier. Daniel's anecdotes were too personal, his references to Sarah too frequent. He knew her favorite coffee order, the way she hummed when she was nervous. I watched her, searching for the woman I'd married. The one who'd laughed at my bad jokes, who'd held my hand through sleepless nights. She was there, but distant, like a figure behind fogged glass. I excused myself to clear the plates, needing a moment to breathe. In the kitchen, I gripped the counter, my heart pounding. The pieces were falling into place, each one a shard in my chest. The late nights, the guarded phone, the way she'd stopped saying, I love you first. I wanted to be wrong. I needed to be wrong. When I returned, Daniel was leaning closer to her, his hand brushing hers as he reached for the wine. She didn't pull away. The room tilted, and I felt the air rush out of me. Sarah, I said, my voice sharper than I intended. She startled, her hand retreating. Daniel's smile didn't falter, but his eyes were calculating, watching me. The rest of the dinner passed in a blur. I played the host, refilling glasses, forcing laughter, but every word felt like a lie. When Daniel finally left, the house felt too quiet, the silence suffocating. Sarah busied herself with the dishes, avoiding my gaze. I stood in the doorway, my voice low. "What's going on, Sarah?" She froze, her hands submerged in soapy water. "Nothing," she said too quickly. "It was just a weird night, that's all." But her voice trembled, and I saw it. The guilt, flickering in her eyes like a candle about to go out. "Tell me the truth," I said, stepping closer. My heart was a drum, each beat louder than the last. She turned, her face pale, her lips parting as if to speak, then closing again. The silence stretched, and in it I saw everything. The late nights weren't just work. The texts weren't just colleagues. The man I'd welcomed into our home wasn't just her boss. "Mark," she whispered, tears welling. I didn't mean for it to happen. The words hit like a physical blow, stealing my breath. I wanted to scream, to demand answers, but my voice was gone. Instead, I saw her, really saw her, for the first time in months. The woman I loved, the woman I'd built a life with, was a stranger. And yet, her pain was real, her regret a mirror to my own heartbreak. I turned away, my vision blurring. The dining room, with its carefully set table and flickering candles, felt like a stage for a play that had already ended. I didn't know what came next, anger, forgiveness, or something else entirely. But as I stood there, the weight of her betrayal settled over me like a shadow, and I knew one thing for certain. The life we'd had was gone, and whatever was left would never be the same.